Down here on the Matagorda shoreline, this past week was a pretty good week for us. Weather played a little bit of conditions on particular days, but for the most part, we were able to get on the water and get some time in. Didn't hit a lot of areas, but really kind of focused more on just small areas and really working these areas like that. Our tide levels were even around this big moon that we've got in place. Got as the week progressed, we were having big moving tides. We have a pretty decent tide early, but then that water would really fall out on us by the afternoon. So we were trying to take advantage of those opportunities early, closer to your shoreline, over our grass beds, the potholes, the structure that we're really wanting to be over this time of year. Water temps pretty much hovered low 60s, depending on what estuary you're in. Some of them were 50. It was 58 to 61 was the general water temp this past week on a daily basis. It would warm up just a little bit. Maybe I think we saw 62, 63 in a couple of areas, but for the most part, that's what we were dealing with wise. So fish were pretty active. Again, being around this big moon, we anticipated that morning minor that we would have, and then of course we'd get to that midday major, and you could gradually see that bite would taper off on us, and that was kind of our game plan. So once we kind of figured that out and got going on that, we had a lot of good success early, and then it would taper later in the day. And kind of like I say, this Matagorda shoreline here, we're really focused on those. Fish the guts, a few of the guts through there. Fish the little drop off that's out there on the outer edge of that bar. Just kind of worked our way down the shoreline here, headed toward Bray. Back here where the old Texas Parks and Wildlife building is, the old harbor there, we kind of worked into those areas, and then worked in here behind Bray and just worked. There's 4 or 5 little back lake mouths that dump, their drains that dump out into those, and you got little guts in those. And we focused more on that kind of stuff, that type of structure and area later in the day, because we knew our water was going to be falling out on us. So typically what those fish will do is they'll start to kind of concentrate somewhat into some of these little areas. So that became our target points after the morning minors. So we tried to get around those majors and really kind of focus and concentrate on that, and did okay with it pretty well. It was productive for the most part. Not a great number of fish, a lot of little fish. We caught a bunch of little bitty guys, in that 12 to 14 range. But the quality fish that we did catch, they were really good fish. Mainly trout, and that's kind of what we were focusing on. A few redfish were sprinkled in there, and they were pretty good for the most part. Main baits that we were throwing, we were focusing on the 4, 5-inch, 3-inch baits, burner shads by down south, multiple different flavors. Watercolor was pretty good, especially if you're on a protected shoreline. That water was pretty clean. Now, you get in one in an area that you had a windward shoreline or something to that effect, then that water would dirty up on you. So we tried to stay as much on the leeward side of these areas like that to stay in that cleaner water and just kind of work that, and these drains that are back in here. Pav lures was another one for us, the little softy in a couple of different flavors. The knock and tail lures, the mirror lures. One of the things that really kind of stood out was the Pav lure, little softy, did really well for us, and it's very reminiscent of a soft dine. Had some few people that were throwing soft dine XLs, had pretty good success with those. Didn't have any corky guys this past week, so we pretty much just kind of stayed with that pattern and with those size baits, and was pretty consistent for us. So color wise, you just have to adjust to what your water clarity is, and just kind of go off of that and let the fish kind of dictate to you what they're seeing, what they're wanting. And so we had a pretty our boxes were pretty diverse as far as colors and sizes, but again, it was the 5-inch all the way down to 3-inch did well for us. So when we got into a little bit more stained water, or even maybe a little bit dirtier water, went to more stuff that had a little bit more the rattle chambers that were in those to kind of help let those fish find and locate what we were trying to offer them. Some of these back lake mouths were still enough water in it that we could work these areas back in that. And it's been kind of nice too. We're in that split season of duck season, so we didn't have to worry about duck hunters. So that was a nice little change of pace, but that's coming to an end here pretty quick. Like I say, we're in the big moon. Our bites early were really good, and then they tapered on us as the day progressed. So we would downsize those baits to a smaller profile to see if we can continue that bait. And for the most part, it worked out pretty well for us. You know, most of these fish are hanging out over mud and grass. If you had some clump shell that was worked into an area, then there's some fish that were hanging out, more redfish that were hanging around, that kind of stuff. But we found our better trout over that mud and shell in a little bit deeper water, especially early. So that was our game plan. That's what we stuck with, and it was a pretty productive week. Down in Spalding, again, with water levels and water temps this past week, we really kind of focused on the drains as much as we could, especially with the falling tide later in the day. If you've listened to these videos in the past, this is one of I love this area down in here in Spalding because it gives you lots of opportunity to find these fish somewhere hanging in one of these drains. Especially when you get super, super low tides, those fish will concentrate into those deeper water drains like that. Depending on where you're at, if it doesn't have to necessarily be Spalding, but it can be any of the area that you fish, whether it's up in this area or down further south or wherever it may be. That's kind of what your tactic should be when that water gets really low and gets chilly. Like I said earlier, water temp was pretty consistent, upper 50s, low 60s. And for the most part, fish were pretty active this past week. We would get into these drains here in the Spalding area. A couple of the days we had pretty low tides later in the day, so you could fish the flat that's out here in front, and we'd found some fish there. But not any great fish that's in that particular area this past week, but the amount of fish, again, there were a lot of smalls that were mixed in there with it. A few redfish sprinkled in there, but I like to get in these little drains here that kind of work back around this little island. You can wade all that back in there. It's firm enough. Just a little squishy mud here and there, but you can still fish it early, especially. Like I said, our tide levels were still up, and then of course as that moon would set and get to that midday major, it would start to draw that water out, and you could feel that water going and see it going. This back lake that's right here, we'd fish it a few times. We get back in this thing, and it's knee deep, which is plenty of water for fish to hold in that kind of area. And again too, it's a protected area, so you can get back there and get out of a higher wind situation, calmer conditions, water clarity pretty good for the most part, and just spent some time back in that. And then of course this other little back lake here, where I like to get on this particular lake when we're fishing it, I like to get on that Carlos side and just run the boat up there on that shoreline, just walk across and dump off into this back lake here. Because if you don't know your path to get back in that one, there's a few shell bars that are mixed in around there, so you can do a little damage to your boat if you're not careful. But like I said, we found fish in all these back lakes, and there wasn't any really great fish that we were trying to target, but there were fish that were mixed in with it, and that was the great thing about it. So white ice and bone diamond, twisted tea, big papa were some of the ones in the down south flavors in the original and the burner shad size. Like I said, we were playing that profile game with the big moon in play. The pavlures has been outstanding for us over the past several weeks, and that's been in their plastics, that's been in their floaters, the little softy, the big softy, all those in just assorted flavors. Not one particular color stood out more than anything else. But if you don't have some of the pavlures yet, and go to their site and check out what they have to offer, they're making a really quality good bait, and it's durable bait too. So, but anyway, working these areas back in this type of stuff with the conditions that we had, and then kind of stayed on the outside here. Didn't really get down to the fingers of Carlos there. Water was pretty stained up and dirty in there, so we really didn't spend any time on it. We were just trying to focus more on the grass and the mud, and that's primarily where our fish were hanging on that. The minor in the mornings was pretty productive for us as we would slide toward that major in the midday. That's around a big moon. You'll see that bite really taper off. So we were trying to get the most production from about that 7 o'clock hour to noonish, and that's primarily when we found and caught our fish, is during that time frame. So these areas down here are still holding fish. It's a great area when you have a lower tide. It's a really good area when you got a higher tide. So it's pretty diverse on how you can locate and find fish in there. You got all the right structure. You got the mud, you got the grass, you got clump shell that's mixed in all those types of areas, and really just kind of focus on your majors and minors during those time frames, and you'll put together a pretty good bag. Down here in Italian Bend, again, early during the minor. All this area down here, plenty of water was in place. Found a lot of redfish scattered about down in here. Again, some of these little back lake mouths that are in here. Didn't have to worry about duck hunters. There's typically a lot of duck hunters that hang out down in this area here. Just worked the shoreline. Stayed as close to the shoreline as we could with the amount of water that we had in play. But then we would slide off, 40, 50 yards off the shoreline and just kind of work all the little bit deeper potholes. And it seemed that the majority of those potholes were holding fish to some degree. In a mixed bag at that. There was black drum here or there. There was redfish sprinkled in there. There was a decent amount of trout sprinkled in there. And just worked these areas pretty thorough for the most part, being really diligent about working the potholes, and that was the key thing for us. And that's going to be something, not just this upcoming week or the weeks after, as we slide deeper into December and we start to get into the new year. Those are areas that you're going to want to try to target and fish around. Those fish are going to be hanging over those types of areas like that. They're predatorial fish anyway, and they're ambush predators, so they like to use that grass as camouflage and just kind of hang out on the edges of those potholes. We were working them pretty slow. That was another thing that kind of became very apparent to us, that if you were working that bait at a pretty decent clip as far as on your retrieve and how you would work it, you wouldn't get that many opportunities. But when we slowed everything down, and that's the key thing when you get into the colder days and the colder months, slowing those baits down real slow and working them through that. You have to understand what your bait does and its fall rate and how it floats in the water and swims. So once we kind of did that and kind of got that figured out, we started having more opportunities, especially in those types of areas. Then we slid across over here to Port Bay, worked this inside shoreline all the way down here to the point. You got a nice little edge that's out there. You got plenty of water, plenty of room that you can put 3 or 4 people across that and fish it comfortably and not have to worry about getting too deep. Especially when the water was falling out, the afternoon trip, if you had right kind of conditions, that lower tide like that, you could really get in here and work that edge like that. And that's primarily where we would locate fish, was hanging right off those little bit deeper edges. Again, the potholes were main thing. So that's what we would do. So again, the baits that really did well for us in the Pav lures, in both the little softies and all his plastics that he has created and made in a variety of colors. The Down South did well for us in both the burner shad and the original size. And of course the knock and tail, and then the mirror lures, soft dine XLs. I think we had a few people that would throw the double D every once in a while, and it did okay. Like I said, we caught fish on just about everything that we presented to these fish, and had decent production. I was a little bit more surprised being around this big moon. I always anticipate the bite around this big moon to be a little bit more difficult. Of course, early on it was great, but again, as the day would progress, when we get into that minor time frame, midday, it became very difficult and very tough. So you really had to be patient, work these areas really slow, really diligently, and you would find and locate fish, and you'd have opportunities that were mixed in there. So you just kind of have to vary your expectations for your day. Always have 2, 3, 4 locations that you possibly can go that's got the same kind of structure. Once you find some fish and you figure out their pattern, think about that next location. If you're going to move, that same type of pattern will set up for you. So, weather-wise, it was pretty decent for the most part. As we got into the weekend, it was pretty good as well. And it looks like we got another little front that may be pushing in here the first part of this upcoming week. So adjust your fishing accordingly. Pay attention to what your weather patterns are. Make sure that you're paying attention to those tides. We're on the back side of the big moon now, so we're going to be starting sliding into those transition days. So just have a diversity in your box of size and profiles, so it gives you a pretty productive opportunity.